Well, welcome everybody to our Friday weekly live stream, Recovery Live. I'm Tom. I'm from Came to Believe Recovery, coming to you today from Radio City Music Hall, up in the offices above Radio City Music Hall, for our edition on how we can overcome biases and stigmas in addiction. Today we're going to have a bunch of normies joining us, and there's one normie getting ready to sit down, which is still out. The jury's still out as to whether he's a normie or not in the big picture. But I want to welcome my friend Sean O'Hare here with me to join in the conversation. I just want to let everybody know that we have the virtual retreat coming up as you guys are joining us, January 6th through the 8th. So Casero Lisa will put up the link, and then you can see it's open now. I know we have people filling up, so that's a good one right after the new year. We'll be in Missouri at the end of January, and then we're going to be out in California. Before we get going, I just wanted to talk to Sean. We haven't seen each other. This is the first time we've seen each other in about a month, right, Sean?
Yep.
And we had completed the Bronx retreat at St. Anthony's, which was a connection that Sean had given us through Father Ignatius, and how well that really went. It was really, I don't know if you've gotten any feedback, probably not.
I've just seen the emails that you sent out, but we haven't talked about it, no.
Right. But that was such a fantastic event, and that they were so affected by it. Father Ignatius, Father Terry, all the missionaries, everybody were really impressed with what the message was, along with what the people at the shelter felt. So we're hoping to do some really significant follow-up to be able to keep the thing going and then spread around to other parts of New York City where this message is not being heard, Sean. It's not. They told us the same thing we hear everywhere. Why didn't anybody tell us this? So being in New York City is going to be a big deal for us in helping people. Today, we're once in a while, guys, let me give you a little background. Addiction is a big topic today in the news and in society and in the world. And while everybody, I think, agrees that it exists, why it exists and what we should do about it and what anybody should do about it and how they look at it, there is some debate about it, and we run into more and more of it as you're in the subject matter. You reach people that have, and I'm really shocked some days at the attitude that some people have towards addiction, people that come from the addiction world, but most of them are what we would call normies. So we thought we have a normie show sometimes. And we asked some people that are not suffering from substance abuse disorders to just talk about how they feel about it. Like, just candidly, what are their views on addiction, and what did they grow up hearing about it, and just off of the cuff, what do they think about it? Because it speaks to the issue when we're out trying to raise money, we're out trying to raise awareness, when we run into people who have these different views about it. So, hi, Anna Branson. Finally, you're back. We have to take a break. She sent me a very disturbing message today on Messenger. Funny, disturbing, but I'm glad that you're back. So, I was doing some research before, and these are things that I know, and there's 13 common addiction stereotypes, which are that most of us would agree to that they exist. Whether they're true or not, mostly they're not true. And Sean, I'll ask you, just from your own view of it. But first, I want to ask you one question. From the first thing on the list says that all addicts are dumpster divers. The idea that a lot of people think that everybody that is an addict is a homeless person living in a dumpster. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you, in your life, would have maybe embraced that idea?
Oh, certainly. I think if you haven't had a personal experience with it, you're influenced by what culture says, right? And like anything else, we're liable to be influenced by the way it's depicted in movies or television shows, and it often shows the most dramatic form of it because that's that's what drama is, and that's why that's how the visual medium works. It's not as potentially dramatic to show the person who is still successful with their job but could be better, the person who's still maintaining a family but could be better, and is struggling, in a more silent way. And I had shared with you, Tom, that my first real exposure to this was a high school friend who, when he got to college, he just really used alcohol as his crutch for socializing, and then it eventually became an addiction, to the point where several car accidents, one in which, lucky to have survived it, and then went to a sober living community after going through rehab, and from a successful family, and he's now recovered and become a very successful dental surgeon. But he had basically gotten a 0.5, I think, GPA for and this is a guy who got 4 O's his whole life.
Right.
He was always, much smarter than me, didn't have to study kind of guy. And but interestingly enough, it's not like that. And it was only when I got to know you, Tom, that I even recalled that experience,
Mm-hmm.
which is strange. I don't know, because we just file it away as a one-off thing, but it didn't necessarily trigger an awareness on a broader scale. I kind of looked at that as a one-off scenario of somebody I knew that had been struggling. And I think the silent nature to this is what's so can feel so impenetrable. And I think, especially men who struggle with it, I think there's the pride and the ego that goes around not wanting to be vulnerable, not wanting to share what they're struggling with. And I even have friends in my own life that, they'll say, maybe I'm drinking too much, or maybe they're starting to verbalize these things a little bit more, but it feels like failure, I think, is the big problem, is that to admit that you're struggling feels like this kind of cliff or something that you have. Once you admit that, there's almost that you now become vulnerable, or there's a weakness to it. So yeah, just like you talked about, often, and what we're trying to do with as many as retreats as possible, spread the word to a donor base, is to raise awareness. And I think the greatest weapon that you have and the tool is it being a weekend retreat, because
Right.
that barrier to entry, so to speak, of either I've got to start going to a meeting every week or a couple times a week through AA, or I've got to go on a full to rehab. You can't hide going to rehab.
Right.
Everyone's going to know you're gone from the workplace, or if you're got a family, people are going to notice if you're not at the kids' soccer game,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to have a story lined up. And I think that's one of the great assets of Came to Believe, is that this can be dealt with in a very profound way, but that's also I think more accessible to a larger audience, and hopefully people can get help quicker, and still address what's kind of at the core of why they found themselves addicted in the first place.
So just to dispel the one myth, they say, Sean, that statistics say 75% of people suffering from substance use disorders are gainfully employed. So the dumpster diving is a myth. That the very seriously addicted people in all sorts of brokenness are working in jobs and doing that. They're costing economies and all corporations literally $1 trillion a year in performance and everything. But that is a myth. I love that you brought up the silent part of this, and this isolation part. And I think as men, that's a different conversation. But the idea that there's some fault of our own, some failure or some weakness, which prevents many addicts from doing anything about it. The medical community has solved it as a disease for almost a half a decade now. So the idea that the addiction affects the brains of the addict differently than a non-addict is kind of been settled. Not kind of, it's been settled. So there isn't a choice in it. And that's another one of the myths, that there's a choice. Now, I read something this morning that said you may have had a choice for the first drink, but after that, there was no choice. And I know that's how it was for me. I didn't have any way of knowing what drinking was going to do to me, right? Think about it. The first time you do it, you don't know. And I took that first drink, it warmed me up, and oh man, I was off to the races and I couldn't stop. It did something to me. And then what we call the spiritual malady, and that brokenness inside from other things just was fueled by it. And it took a recovery program, like Came to Believe, to bring me out of it. And Sean, you made another good point, and it's exemplified at the shelter in the Bronx. Was these guys don't have access to the types of care that some of us have, like a rehab for $50,000 or $30,000 or anything. So they're in this shelter, and it's a high bar to climb for them. And maybe they don't even want to try it. They've given up in some reasons. This is their lot in life. And then we go in and show them this chance for freedom in such a short period of time. And in this case, it was free to them. The hope was awesome, my friend. I mean, to watch these guys change. And I don't know if you heard the story of one of the gentlemen, and after the 9th step, he called his estranged daughters from the shelter Saturday afternoon to make amends to them. Wow. And reunite. This had everyone in tears that he had done it. And this is the kind of powerful stuff, guys, that happens at these retreats. And we believe we got to keep this going, because there are people like that all over, in CEO offices, in dumpsters. There are some in dumpsters, and in shelters, and just working amongst us throughout our lives. I'd love to bring on my two coworkers, who we also have we kind of qualify them as normies. They are normies, to join in the conversation about overcoming biases and stigmas of addiction, and see what they have to say about it. So I'd love to welcome Cassera and Lisa to the broadcast.
Hi. Hello.
Sean says he's wearing different perfume today. He said perfume, not cologne. But
for him, I'd like to smell good for Tom.
Interesting.
Patrick said he was more attracted to Sean today, so we're a little nervous about that.
Yeah. All right, learning about pheromones.
Pheromones. But you guys have been involved in this now with us, especially with me in this for a long time. And Cassera, I know you've had a lot of also direct work with it in the harm reduction stuff and working on the streets, and really been exposed to some of the stigma and the stereotypes and the things that people get pinned with, right? Because it's a person suffering from something, right? It's not an addict. It's a person suffering from it. We want to take that person stance from it. But when you got started in it, what were one of some of the biases and stigmas that you guys held or saw or felt in life?
I know for me, my journey into educating myself and kind of losing that bias and stigma aspect started actually academically. I think that it wasn't something I just explicitly felt like, all addicts chose that life, it's their fault, deal with it. I think kind of like Sean was saying, you watch movies and you see it and nobody really talks about it. No one explains to you what it means to have a substance use disorder, what it means to go through that, and what it means to enter recovery or become recovered. No one talks about it. No one explains it to you. So you just assume they chose to do that and this is their life. And now it's on them to change that. So I feel like that's kind of the misconception that I held. And then I was taking psychopharmacology in undergrad, and we had to do research, and we had to do research either on the choice model or disease model. And I wanted to look at people's perception of substance use, and then specifically within prisons, how is it treated? How are the individuals treated? Are people going into prison with a substance use disorder, or are they getting into prison and that's when the substance use begins, and things like that. So we did long research, and what I found I did not like, the language used, how a lot of people's perceptions about people that are using or are in chaotic usage, how they felt about it. And I was like, that doesn't sit right with me, but I feel like, I'm part of the problem. So on just kind of a whim, I was like, let me apply to this recovery center that's in the area. No, maybe I can, be a part of the community, make a difference, do something at the minimum, learn something. And then when I joined, I was working with people that were in recovery and recovered and had gone through this. And, they all shared with me their stories, what they had struggled with, and how they kind of ended up where they are now. And one, I was like, you have lived 3 lives and you're like 30, that's it. But you've lived all these lives. And I thought it was just insane what they've accomplished, what they've overcome, what they've gone through. So that kind of humanized it. And it's like, oh, everything that I thought is not true. And I thought that because I never reached out to educate myself further. So that was like the first beginnings of me really understanding people were just struggling and they just needed help. And sometimes that's just listening or being compassionate about it. That was my first little take.
And to talk about failure, one thing that feeds it is, as an ex-addict, when you're addicted, you are failing at stuff. That does tend to go along with this, okay, right? You fail at life. You fail at this. I didn't get drunk driving, so people get drunk driving. You lose jobs. You lose relationships. So it's not that hard of a thought, I wouldn't think, to think, well, they're just failures. It's too easy a line to go to. And I wish I knew more about my own disease potential, Sarah, when I started, and was able to see some of the warning signs, and had some around me be more compassionate about it. And I might have said, wait a minute, like if I had cancer or anything else, I would seek help. And because it has this stigma, and it does, guys, it does. We're fighting it. There's just no doubt about it. People don't go for help because of these reasons. And so we have this whole epidemic going on. So for me, there was fear. I wish I had known more. What about you, Lisa?
It's interesting. Since we talked about the topic, I'm trying to think like back to my earliest days and if I ever had a stigma attached to it, because kind of at my peak, like I was so exposed to it. Like my 2 best friends who I've known since I was 7 years old got addicted to heroin. I knew those girls inside and out. I knew they weren't bad people. The one was in AP classes. Like she was brilliant. So to me, like, I don't know, like I blame the person that introduced it to them. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, why did they do this? So it was always that, like, they had a choice, but they didn't have a choice. It was presented, they took the temptation, and then they got stuck. So I don't think I ever had a stigma against them because I knew 2 amazing people who just did the wrong thing and couldn't get out. So I think I've always had this compassionate mindset. Like, they didn't choose this life. Like, I know they didn't want to be going down to Patterson. I know they don't want to be stealing money. Like, I know they don't want to do this, but this is the addiction that they're in. So that's kind of why I went in the psych route too, Cass. Like I went into psychology with the mindset of I'm going to be a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. Later to be told, like, sorry, you're a normie and you can't, so change your major. But I think I always had that disease model without even knowing that that's what it was, just because of my experience with it.
Yeah. I resent the person that told you couldn't do that. I wish I could go talk to them about that, because I think sorry about
I remember it clear as day. I remember the hallway. I remember everything like it's a clear picture, because I was like, oh shoot, now what? I'm in year 3.
I think that's ridiculous, because while I do understand and acknowledge the value of someone relating to you on that level, like, yes, I've been there, I've done that, so like, let's talk about it. There's still value in like what we have to say and what we can bring to that table, because I remember when I started in the field, I was like, I would just sit in the corner, be quiet, listen. I would talk when spoken to, and like everyone was like, I know you have something to say, I can see it on your face, because my face just tells everything. It's a strength and a weakness, but they were like, just talk, you have value, you have something to say, people are going to listen to you. And I was horrified. I was terrified. I'm not going to say the right thing. I'm not going to be able to help them. What if I make things worse? What if they just look at me and are like, why would I listen to you? And I had so many fears about it, but then I just started talking and listening, and not once did someone look at me and say, oh, you've never like physically experienced this, don't talk to me, go over there.
Right.
Like it was more about gaining trust and putting aside my own beliefs. Like it didn't matter what I believed in, it didn't matter what I thought was right or what I think is right in the world. All that mattered was my focus on them, listening to what they're telling me that they need or that they want, or just not even talking and just listening to them. Sometimes that's how people warmed up to me. I remember one participant, I didn't talk the whole time. Like I would just listen to him talking, and he would ask me like, can you cover your ears and turn away, when he wanted to tell his peer something like something he didn't want me to hear. And I'd cover my ears, like sing a song, stare at the wall. And eventually he came up to me and was like, I like you because you've never tried to intrude, you never tried to insert, you just listened and like were patient. And then me and him would have long, in-depth conversations about everything going on in his life, and he would ask me about mine. And so I just think that though we don't have that specific angle, that's not the only way to help someone. It's just not. And sometimes it gives us a strength where there's topics that we can dive into because it's not going to affect us on that level emotionally, whereas someone else that's experienced that might take them back to a place that they're not ready to look at again. And I think that just goes all back to this stigma and bias. It's like, you got to educate yourself and understand that just because what I believe in doesn't mean someone else believes in that. And sometimes their circumstances don't even let them see that belief system. So you can't just throw your values on someone and judge them based on that, because that's just not right. That's not how it works, being human beings. And my TED Talk is over.
So, I mean, great point that I got out of it is, you guys as non-addicts, the idea that you can't help is not true. Why can't? Of course you can. I mean, you're helping us now. You're a huge asset for this in many areas. And you're right. Your perspective on things, because Sarah and Lisa, is one that I miss sometimes. I'm off it because I have a different view. But we have this piece that you don't have. There is a piece, and working together, we can get this. I think it's been important, all of this education thing. And I'm glad that Sean is just listening and hear that. I know he's learned more about this since we've just been talking, right, about this whole idea of addiction and getting recovered and being able to tell our story. I think as important as it is for me to be out there telling the story, because I'm this recovered person running this organization, to have Sean understand it and tell the story from his perspective as well is really important. I wonder if you feel like that's even more important after we've been working a little bit, Sean.
Oh yeah, no, I think the scale of the impact, I think is overwhelming when you see it in the kind of totality of it. I mean, I think it doesn't take necessarily that long for people to make the jump from the kind of intellectual side of it to the kind of ripple effects in the marketplace and in families, because of the silent nature of it. We don't tend to think of it like we think of homelessness as a big problem because we see it, right? We think of other social ills as problematic and large because we see it. But when these things are happening, this person in their home life, this person in their relationships, this person in the workplace, you don't see them in the aggregate. And I think that's the first and most important step in terms of awareness, is the scale of the impact. And even those that like I mentioned with my own friend that had gone through it, I looked at it as a one-off. I didn't think of it as he is part of a societal, challenge that or he's part of a much larger group of those that are struggling with addiction. I just thought of it as a guy who had a bad experience in college and had some things he was working through, and unfortunately, alcohol was the crutch, and then until it became addictive in its properties. So I think I don't know that we fully have a grasp on how to. I mean, outside of person to person making this increasing awareness. But I think that's the first and most important step is trying to help people see not just these as people that have gotten themselves into their own situation, but that they're part of a very, very large demographic, and the likelihood somebody is almost 100%. It's just that they're not expressing it, or it's not seen to you. I was just spending a lot of time with family, and I asked my uncles who are these are guys grew up in Long Island, extremely extroverted. They had a bar in the basement of the house they grew up in, and none of them drank. And I said, well, do you think that was because your father was an alcoholic? And they were like, it was like, what? They never had this thought in their lives that the fact that my grandfather would drink a case of beer watching a baseball game, and the fact that extroverted Irish Catholics in Long Island in the 60s didn't drink is like, maybe this was, and it was like it had never occurred to them that they had reacted to what they had seen, right? So it affects people in all sorts of different ways. Again,
Sorry, that's my dog.
Wow, is that
Quite a reaction.
That's an applause right there. And the funny thing is, we usually have a dog here in the office, but we don't have one today.
Yeah, Winston's not here.
Although he's not nearly that vocal, but yeah. So those are my perspective from being a normie, but knowing that you can kind of burn the candle at both ends for a while until it becomes unsustainable, right? So, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to jump out here in a second, but it's a pleasure always to be on these calls and be kind of encouraged in what the organization is doing and what you all are doing in your individual capacities. And I'm just honored to be playing a small role. And next time we're going to get chairs on similar level though, so I don't feel so.
Yeah, because you're actually same height as me, I think, right? You're 6'2".
Yeah, I feel so.
I like it. I feel it's the only way I feel superior to anybody.
Yeah, he jacked up his chair before I got here.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much. We'll see you in a little bit.
Yep.
Thanks. So it's just so interesting, Lisa, to hear from just you guys, because I just don't, I didn't know that somebody told you that because you're not an addict, you don't have anything. I never knew that.
Yeah. My advisor at good old William Patterson University, she pulled me aside. She's like, yeah, you don't want to be doing that. So I kind of was lost after that and just took random jobs. Like I graduated with a degree in psych. I couldn't change my major at that point. And then I was like, I don't know what to do. So then I went into counseling, more generic counseling. And I was like, well, maybe this is still a way that like I can help. Maybe it's not the addict itself, but maybe it's people like me that were, impacted by the addiction, so the friends, the family, because as Sean was saying, it's a ripple effect. Everyone's impacted. And as someone who was right next to it, I felt so lost and helpless. And like, I always knew like you can't force help on them. They have to be ready, so it's like, then what? Like, so I didn't do anything until they came to me, and then I just accepted them as they were. So if they went into remission and they, reached out, I didn't judge. I just took them back in my life and was there for them. So that's all I knew to do. I still don't know if there was anything more I could have done, but I'm fortunate enough to have them both in my life still, and they're doing great. But not because of anything I did. They found it within themselves to want to make the change.
I often think that when you have an addict in your life, right, and you're not the addict, and it's absolutely, we preach about this, the non-addicts suffer.
Yeah.
Like no other disease makes someone physically suffer around them. At least in my family suffered. My mother will say for 20 years or however, 30 years, she prayed every day and worried every day.
Oh.
I was drinking half the time. So I was anesthetized.
Right.
So while I had stress and anxiety and I was hurting, she was hurting, but dead sober.
Right.
So the effect is, it's almost, you can make a case that it can have as a profound effect on a normie as it can on the addict, as far as you know, how it affects your life. And we know that normal people in families with addiction get depression, and they lose jobs, and they stay home, and it has a huge actual practical effect on them. And
well, there's a reason why there's Al-Anon.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's a reason for it. It's not just because people want to go and complain about their relatives. It's because it deeply affects you when it's in your life like that. So I mean, I think it's just something that often goes unrecognized. And one thing that I think Came to Believe does really well is recognize that, you know, and BJ is a huge advocate for including the family. And I think it's so important that she reminds us, you know, I'm here, but she's on the board, and she can remind the board, hey, it's the family too. And I think we're fortunate in that we have quite a few family members that are in the board and very involved to keep that in perspective, because it's easy to focus on the person with the addiction, and it's really easy to forget about everyone else because you want to bring that person, you want to get them well, but other people need to get well too. So,
you know, we talked about this invisible piece, which came up. Sean brought it up, and then Sue is commenting in the comments about the whole idea of this anonymous.
Right.
You know, where did this come from? And did this feed this thing back from the beginning?
Right.
That just by calling it Alcoholics Anonymous, did we start a stigma that we're less than? Because we certainly can't talk about it. I go by the principle of everybody knew I was drinking. Why, when I stopped drinking, don't I want everybody to know?
Right.
You know, so, but I think that's an interesting thing that they started with this anonymous thing that is absolutely shame-based. I think if you have to be anonymous, some level of shame. It's not Cancer Anonymous. It's not Diabetes Anonymous. It's not Heart Disease Anonymous, right? I don't know. We're going down.
I 100% agree with you. And I wish it was, I saw a post on another Facebook page about this. Like, I'm not anonymous so I can save someone's life. Like, I need my story as a tool to connect with someone and maybe pull them out. And it's just, you know, and there was a whole campaign many years ago for I Am Not Anonymous. And it was people taking pictures of themselves with their story. Like, this is me, this is what I went through, and here I am now. And I think it's powerful. And I do think having that anonymous factor in it is because of shame. Like, why? I get that but it's because of the stigma. Because if they come out and say, I was an alcoholic, I, you know, was a heroin addict, like, how are you going to be looked at by employers, by your peers, by family, if you come out and say this? So they hide it. But if that shame never existed, they wouldn't have to. So it's
like their stories.
Words.
Their stories help, like, not just people that might be suffering from using it. It helps people like me and like you that might not know what it was like. You obviously experienced it with two of your closest friends, but for someone like me who didn't have that directly within like my immediate family or like my friends, now people that I met who are some of my closest friends, like them sharing their story and what it was like and what they went through and what they had to overcome, and then looking at their life now and who they are now, that's what helped me to truly understand like the impact on family, on yourself, on your friends, on the world in general, and how people are looking at you and how you have to deal with that and just everything that comes with it. Because it's not just I'm using a substance, it's this is how the world is looking at me, this is how the world's treating me, this is the world is telling me I deserve to die and I don't deserve anything. Mm-hmm. And then we say, well, why don't you just fix it yourself? It's like, because you're telling me I don't even deserve to be here, so how am I going to pull myself, like, how am I going to do this by myself? And I think that's, like Lisa was saying, for Came to Believe and a lot of other like resources, it's about community and building people up and compassion. And that's why the bias and the stigma has to go away. And that's why talking about it is so important, because you can't learn anything unless you talk about it and air it out and admit that you've had bias and admit why you've had it, and then try to see it from a different perspective or from a different side.
Dee makes a good point. Dee in the UK, and it's one of the stereotypes, guys, that addicts don't want to quit. Right? They don't want to quit, and people will say, "You just want to be that way." And in most cases, the ones that I know, the ones that are being recovered deep down, they don't want to be that way. We don't want to be that way, but we don't know what to do about it. Dee said it, and she was completely unable to stop. So we head into that blank space. And then when someone tells you, well, and if you do stop, you got to be anonymous. And then this, and you can never be recovered. You got to always be recovering. So there I'm also less than again, and less than and less than and less than. Think about that from the standpoint of the addict, or what they're telling. And even the normies are being told the same thing. They're never going to be okay, right? How would you like that, to have your family member or somebody tell you, you're going to live with this the rest of your life? They may recover, but they're always going to be the greatest mentors, some of the greatest people of influence in my life are these recovered people. The people that came from England and from California that came to the Bronx retreat, they were spreading pearls of wisdom to everybody, not just the addicts, from a life that they created that became so successful in a lot of ways. So it can't be anonymous, having that be anonymous, and the shame that they can never be that or give anything, when in fact, many cases, they have so much to offer society. And that was one of the other stigmas, that addicts have nothing to offer society, has to be put to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I see Anna. She says, is anyone actually okay? No, we all got our crap. Normie or not, like we've all got something, and that's something I always hear Tom say is like, the program works for everybody. Everybody should be in a 12-step program because we all got stuff, whether it's drugs, alcohol, food, codependency, whatever it is, we all have something that we need to work through. So no, no one's ever actually okay. I don't think. We all have our stuff, and it's all about, working through it and being self-aware.
And we're trying to today, one of those things is erase any line that there is between you guys and me, which I don't think there is one, which is the addict and the non-addict, because there are. I mean, that's why we're on here today talking about this. In the world, there's lines like that. People think that there's a difference. And so removing those lines will open people's eyes to say, yes, we got to help them like we'd help anybody else. And it's not a free ride. That's the other thing I think that some people think is that, the addict put himself where he is. Why should we give him a free ride out of it? When in many cases, I know you saw this, Cassara, it wasn't a free ride out of it. It was a step up. It was a hand up out. And if not even that, it was just a hand to keep him alive, right?
Yeah.
And that's we can go in. That's a whole nother discussion. How willing are we to just lend a hand, not even a hand up, but lend a hand to somebody? That's a whole nother show we'll do. But yeah, we all have something, and I like what Sue says. There's a difference between anonymity and confidentiality. That's a better distinction.
Yeah.
When I worked at the university with Lisa for years and never told her anything about it. Nobody knew anything about it. But it wasn't an anonymous thing. And it was because of these stigmas and this stereotype that I worried, and rightly so in many cases, that if you come out with that you had this in your history, it would negatively impact your employment.
Right.
So, or what people thought about you. And unfortunately, I mean, this is why we're talking about it and why we got to keep talking about it. But then I finally told you guys, but I think you knew something because you said he keeps going away on these weekends someplace.
It's like, retreats, all right, you're into your church. It's cool.
That's funny.
I didn't know any difference, But I'm reading Danny's comment. I'm trying to interpret it a little bit, but he's saying he doesn't think it's a shame thing. And I'm not sure I agree. Like, I think there's shame from the person with the addiction to reach out for help because of the stigma that the quote unquote normies have. So like, I think employers, right? Employers probably have the most to gain from helping their employees
Mm.
find recovery, right? I mean, from absenteeism, for lack of productivity, things of that nature. But I don't know that I've seen a really active, robust program that's offered from an employer for addiction services. It's something that's not there. Like maybe within your insurance benefits, there's something, but there's nothing that says if you are struggling with addiction, knowing that 75% of people are fully employed,
Right.
there's nothing that says come to us. And because the lack of conversation about it, it just keeps increasing that stigma. Well, I can't go to them. Like, but if you talk about it and normalize it, then treatment becomes less scary and outing yourself becomes less scary because you know what? A lot of people have the problem. So it's just interesting. I do think there's a shame component from the person struggling with the addiction because you're afraid of being judged by the person that doesn't have it.
And the thing that you just said, Lisa, in many cases, you are being judged.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right.
It's not just a stigma. It's a fact. It's being. They told us in Florida when we met with a hospital group down there, when someone comes in with addiction and needs problems, they open up the phone book to try to figure out where to send them.
Right.
They don't have a program.
Right. Right.
So what hope is that?
Exactly.
And I feel like even people that have become recovered or in recovery can be just as judgmental as people that haven't even experienced it.
That's true.
And I think that's a big piece too. Like how Tom's always saying, like, you stand outside the door, you don't, some people way inside that door, they forgot the door that they came through.
Mhm.
And they are like, well, if I did it, like, you should just be able to do it. Why can't you do it? Look at my, like, as if that's going to help someone feel better, get there. So it's like, there's judgment coming from all sides and a person might feel trapped. And then it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? Because everyone's telling me what they think. And I think that's why having the conversations is so important. But on top of that, people need to look in the mirror and realize that, again, just because you have a belief about the world does not mean that you need to push that belief on someone else. Like,
well, I just feel like a hypocrite because as you're saying that, I'm a former smoker. So I'm probably whatever, like, just quit. I did it. You should be able to do it. So mirror, got it.
That. Yeah, I just feel like that's like our global humanity problem is we all want to push what we believe and judge someone based on like our own belief system. Like, I believe in this, so I'm judging you because you don't do this. It's like they might come from a completely different culture. They grew up somewhere different. They had a different family life. Every experience is different. So I can't judge you based on what I believe in because we've had two completely separate experiences. Like, that's why you just need to talk to people, have a conversation, let them tell you what they need, talk to them, let them just speak it out. And then you can be like, oh, okay. So what you're telling me is you do want to go to detox, or you want to go to, you do want to go to a retreat. You're ready for that. That's what you want to do. All right, let's set it up. Let's go. I'll get you connected. We'll do that. But if they're like, I'm too scared, I'm not ready, you can't hammer it into them. Then you're just there. Like Tom's saying, you're just the hand at that point. You're just talking them through it. You can talk about your experiences, like things that have helped you, and ask them, what's going on with you. And then one day they might be like, okay, now I'm ready. Like, now I feel confident to be there. But it's those conversations.
That's a little shots fired, Lisa.
I know, I see it. But show the next one.
I was like,
thank you, Anna. Thank you.
I was like, wow, all righty then.
I love it.
Right. Wow. Yeah, it's the stand outside the door. I mean, I was in a program last night. It's again a conversation for a different show, and I was with a bunch of people that were not outside the door. They were so far inside the door. But just like you said, Casera, I had to suspend my judgment because just because they're inside the door, whatever they're doing for reasons that I don't know. I just met them. So who am I to say? I mean, I can clearly see laying over there inside the doorness over what I'm doing wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. just because they're inside the door doesn't mean something they're doing isn't working. Inside the door meaning they're inside the door of something that they've decided is where everybody needs to be, right? And that it is whatever that is. It's only time has gotten me. I mean, you guys are, especially you, Sarah, you're wise beyond your years because when I was your age, I was making all kinds of absolute statements and this and that because my perspective was not nearly what it is today. 50 some odd years of seeing myself make mistakes and things and seeing things that I thought were this or that not actually be this or that, right? And finding that the two ears and the one mouth mean something, right? Listen a little bit more.
Yeah. I feel like my growth was, Tom and I were talking to someone the other day, and they just were making comments that to my core I disagree with, and their whole process I was like, no. And after Tom was like, wow, you really kept your cool, because usually I'm like, my face completely changes. It's like, okay, we're doing this. Yeah, I can't control my face, but like I like swallowed down like my own, this is what I believe in, so you should believe in it, and you don't understand, and tried to just have the conversation back and forth, understand where the person was coming from, why they believe in that. And it was a productive conversation, and I kept it cool, kept it down, kept it together.
It came from a perspective that you have to take into consideration, because on the surface it could have been, yeah, Lisa, I didn't tell you that, I thought this was going to go badly. I said, oh, this is going to go badly. When the conversation was, the speaking words sounded worse than the real thought behind it. Like behind it, when we talked through it, we realized it wasn't so bad as, and really the conversation, we were really more all on the same page than we were not on the same page. But those are those lessons learned. But I did say, I mean, that was impressive because I said, oh, there we go.
He was so worried. I'm like, oh God. I felt it. I felt like, you get hot. I felt it happen.
Yeah. I said, I'm going to have to sweep this up somehow.
Put it down.
And it was the right thing that you did by not going overboard and doing the right thing was you're practicing what you preach, which is you stood back and you have yours said and you were able to articulate it intelligently. As soon as you go away from that, nobody's listening anyway.
That's what I found is a lot of time I feel like people stop listening and they just want to give their opinion. They don't stop to try to understand the other side and why they believe it, and not for the idea that you're going to change your mind, but just to understand it. And that's something over the last 6 years that I've really tried to do, is not just bash something and say, no, you're a moron for thinking this, but say like, tell me why you support this and like what behind it do you feel connects with you? Because we're all human. There's a reason that things happen. There's a reason we have beliefs, and trying to understand the core of what that is connects us and helps us understand. But the minute we try to stop that connection is the moment that the divisiveness happens on every level, whether it's addiction, politics, religion, whatever. As soon as we stop listening, we're divided.
There's a mic drop.
I try very hard to ask questions, and often they know my position on things. They feel that I'm asking sarcastically. Well, tell me why you think that. Like, I'm not, but that's not my intention. My intention is really to understand it so that I can have empathy and I can understand, and maybe to have some ammunition to research so that I could combat that, well, really, that's not the case. So it's interesting, but it's a conscious effort for me not to try to judge and just say you're a moron with certain things. Educating. Exactly. We need to educate ourselves on everything. Otherwise, we're just as ignorant as the rest.
Sometimes, guys, when Lisa says to me, tell me why you think that, it's really, she's telling me, yeah, you're wrong, and you need to be corrected, and whatever that is.
At least she's letting you get there by yourself, figure out you're wrong, instead of just being like, you're wrong. Yeah. Let's go on this journey together on why you are incorrect.
Me on the right path, and I'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm
sorry. She's just.
But the conversation is big. I don't know. We need to do this more often. It's what we're trying to do everywhere. Is the more awareness we can get with programs like this, and doing our retreats and just keeping this conversation going. And that's the thing, guys. I'm in every audience I can get in. As you guys know this, I say yes to everything. The event I was in last night, events I've been in, that, it's not just the things I think I have to 100% agree with or 100% go. Mostly at times it's not. To just be there and sometimes say nothing because you just know there's nothing to say. And sometimes I'm given openings. I don't know, but that's a conversation's got to keep going.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just kind of watching the comments, and there's someone talking about how it's hard for them to open up and talk. And there was a suggestion of journaling. And one of the things I'm thinking about, and one of the experiences I've had, is just show up. Like, go to a meeting, go, whether it's virtual or in person, just show up, be there, listen. And someone might present themselves that you feel comfortable connecting with and opening up to. That's one of the biggest things I've found at retreats, is that someone's going to share their story and you're going to see yourself in them. And then you're going to feel comfortable opening up and sharing. So it's just listening and being around, and you don't have to share until you're ready. But I think journaling is a good way to kind of get it out so it's not bottled up. But being present and hearing other people's stories will kind of help reduce some of that shame that you might be holding, which might be why it's hard to talk.
It's that whole terminal uniqueness when you think you're the only one suffering from it.
Right.
It's hard to talk about it. You think it's no one's ever done as bad as me.
Right.
And then you hear someone talk about something and you're like, oh, wait. I did that. Oh. and that was the experience. We have it at all our retreats, but we had it significantly in the South Bronx when the missionaries and the guys that were working with them were not able to get these guys to open up at all. And we went in, and basically what opened them up was the 6 of us told a 10-minute piece of our story. Each one of them connected to somebody, and they even said it wasn't all of us the same, because everybody had a little different story about a brokenness and a way they came over it. And they all opened up then. And maybe they would have someday, but that idea, that's a beautiful aspect of this thing, that this secrecy element of it has to be overcome.
Right. Well, then there's another comment about respecting traditions. And Tom, I don't know if you want to grab that real quick. We only have a couple minutes left, but that's something we hear quite often. Like, the traditions of AA is that anonymity. Like, what do you say to that?
Well, I have no comment to that. But
sorry to put you on the spot there.
Got to respect. And Danny, you could clarify this. Are you talking about the traditions, or are you just talking about traditions, just like you respect what your government does or something? Are you saying, like, as people that have certain opinions inside some door and have it, and it's based on some sort of traditional look or traditional series of events that we should honor, we should at least allow them to be who they are? All of us Yankee fans get to be Yankee fans, right? Traditions. If you're speaking about the traditions, that's a different story. The traditions about, that whole anonymity thing. So if you clarify that, we'll talk about it. But I would agree with honoring others. It's just what Kasara's saying, is not pushing your beliefs. Right. So somebody that has traditions, if they're working in your life in whatever the category is, we do the YMCA dance at the Yankee games. We're going to do it forever, right? We're going to do that. So we're at 12:55, guys. Danny, but you guys have any final word? And we're going to head off on our weekend. Next week, we're going to have kind of a special honorary show next week. And you guys are just hearing about this, Lisa and Kasara. Mm-hmm. So sorry about that. But one of our longtime came to believe supporters for years has a 50th anniversary coming up. Liz Rogers has her 50th. It's actually on the 7th of December, Pearl Harbor Day. She got bombed, she says, bombed. Pearl Harbor Day. And and that was one of her jokes on that day. So on the 9th, we're going to have some people on, and we're going to talk about some stories and honor her a bit, because 50 years is a big deal for someone to have made, and the contribution that she's made to Came to Believe in for addiction and recovery in the country and around the world. She went to Russia and places, because stuff you guys don't even know about is impressive. And so at least for part of the show next week, if probably the whole show, we're going to be talking about that. So join us next week, because a lot of you in our audience know her. And so we just think it'd be appropriate to honor her and talk some of the stories and the successes and things that went on.
She's a cool lady. I had the honor of meeting her at the Schoolies Mountain Retreat 3-4 years ago. She's a really interesting, cool lady. So that's awesome. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, it's I've traveled all over her. There's some of the stories we won't tell, but they're very funny, especially Dale Barker and Stephanie Barker, and Sue and Steve were around all those years back when we were all traveling together with Grace and everybody. So anyway, thanks for coming on, guys. It's a really important conversation, and you're an integral part of our organization, being quote unquote normies, although Anna doesn't think so, Lisa.
She's right.
And to have supporters like Sean and Patrick Grace behind us, behind the scenes, and people like Jody and Thorpe and Ralph Fearman, along with all the recovered people that are behind the scenes, people like Dee Conniff, Viv D'Souza, Alicia Martinez, Ruth Ann Van Bark, and others around the country, Dale Marsh, this team that's very diverse, working all together for the same purpose of ending addiction. So thanks for coming, guys. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. Peace.